Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily. A mother working as a food delivery driver fatally stabbed in the neck. The suspect now behind bars.
Turned out to be two 14-year-old juveniles.
A police officer now recovering from a shot in the back. How a routine shift turned violent quickly.
They encountered this individual, and within minutes, within seconds, they were in a gunfight.
An NFL player is facing felony charges, accused with attacking his own girlfriend. Plus, emotional statements from 3 families, their loved ones beat to death with a baseball bat by a former pro player.
You're an evil person.
Brandon, go enjoy your cage and some top ramen.
Law and Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmire along with Terri Austin. 2 teenage boys are in jail in Texas, charged with murdering a delivery driver. Law and Crime's Angenette Levy spoke with police and has more on the victim and the suspects.
Yeah, Brian, those 2 14-year-old boys are being held on capital murder charges in Ryan Muncie Graham's death. Her family is grieving and preparing for her funeral.
Last Saturday night, Ryan Muncie Graham was just doing her job, delivering food for Uber Eats to an apartment complex in Haltom City, Texas, near Fort Worth, when she was attacked.
The delivery was never made. The food was found beside her on the ground. So we believe that the 2 juvenile suspects in this case basically were just out trying to find somebody to rob, and they ran into her.
Sergeant Eric Peters says detectives used surveillance video to locate suspects, 2 14-year-old boys who lived in an apartment complex nearby. Prosecutors say the teens confessed and wanted to steal Graham's car, but couldn't find her keys, so they stabbed her in the neck and took her phone.
The fact that they're juveniles, for, a phone, we're talking about a phone that everybody should know nowadays you really can't do anything with unless it's your phone.
Peters says Graham's phone was found in a dumpster at the apartment building where the boys lived. Graham had 3 children and a husband, Cameron, who told me she loved her children and helping people. A GoFundMe page has raised more than $70,000 for her family, who are reeling from the pain of such a senseless crime.
For them to be juveniles to do this, it's kind of not the norm. It is kind of shocking in that sense.
Now, during the initial detention hearing for both of those teens, it was revealed that they were both on probation for evading arrest. One was actually also on probation for breaking into a vehicle and had marijuana in his system. The Tarrant County District Attorney's Office is not commenting right now on whether or not those teens will be charged as adults. Brian?
Thanks, Angenette. Joining us for legal analysis is criminal defense attorney Charlie Rittgers along with Terri Austin. Charlie, murder in the attempt to steal a car or a cell phone, as it ended up being, that's capital murder in Texas. And if they're tried as adults, that's punishable by life without parole or the death penalty. If you're the defense attorney here in this case, what's the goal here and how do you get there?
Yeah, it's critical, especially at this stage, to try to keep these teenagers in juvenile court. And, Angenette indicated that these 2 might have criminal records, which obviously cuts against keeping them in juvenile court. However, they're not close to turning 18. I think it would be a different story if these individuals were 16 or 17 years old. But by the fact that they're 4 years prior to turning 18, we all heard what the sergeant who investigated this case said about the silliness that they were doing this to take a phone that is essentially not usable. That really indicates that their maturity level is not really nearing the point of adulthood, and hopefully juvenile court will be able to adequately punish and rehabilitate each teenager so that they can stay in juvenile court as opposed to going into the adult system and being shaped in their early teenage years in a prison.
Yeah, it seems like an argument the defense will likely put forward in front of a judge. Angenette, the attorneys for the 2 teenagers are already raising questions about the evidence, right?
Yeah, that's right. And the judge actually even raised some of the same questions that the defense attorneys did. They were questioning the exact way that the police were led to these 2 children. They are children. They're 14-year-old boys. So there was an eyewitness, there was surveillance video, but they were really pressing the prosecutor in the hearing about what led the police to them. They're also questioning the statement that the two teens gave to law enforcement and how voluntary that statement might have been.
Something for the defense to sink their teeth in. Terri, they're 14, could be tried as adults or as juveniles. What do you think the state will prosecute this case as?
You know, I definitely think at the end of the day, they're going to prosecute them as children because, like Charlie said, they are 4 years from adulthood, and they really did not seem as though they understood any of the issues that they should have in a case like this. Either way, whether they try them as adults or whether they try them as children, we know they are not going to face the death penalty because the Supreme Court ruled in 2005 that if you are under the age of 18, you cannot be sentenced to death. It goes against the Constitution.
Of course, and we'll keep eyes on this case. Of course, the sentencing is different if they're tried as adults than as juveniles. We'll let you know how that progresses. Thank you, everyone. The woman once described as the most hated woman in America hopes her new business venture will change how people see her. Casey Anthony was acquitted of murdering her 2-year-old daughter, Kaylee, in 2011. She's now launched a private investigation firm. People magazine reports Anthony has filed documents listing herself as a registered agent of Case Research and Consulting Services, LLC. The business is registered to a home owned by the lead investigator hired by her defense team at trial. Anthony's unable to obtain a Florida private investigator's license as a convicted felon. Reports say Anthony maintains her innocence and is looking to help others facing serious legal charges. In a 2017 interview with the Associated Press, Anthony said, "I'm okay with myself. I sleep pretty good at night." The so-called QAnon shaman pleads not guilty to all charges related to the storming of the Capitol. Jacob Chansley made headlines after entering the Capitol building in horns and fur earlier this month. Chansley's lawyer says his client hasn't eaten since Monday after being transferred from a jail in Arizona because the jail in D.C. isn't serving him the organic food he needs. Albert Watkins told the Associated Press that Chansley would be willing to testify at President Trump's impeachment trial because he felt duped by him. Chansley will be back in court next month. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, how police use a YouTube video to catch an alleged prankster. Plus, a hero send-off as an officer wounded in a shooting is released from the hospital. Those stories and more next. A YouTuber accused of faking a medical emergency in New York City's Times Square to gain followers has also gained a criminal record, according to the NYPD. Police say the prankster known as Princey planned and filmed himself apparently passing out in his car. Officers smashed his windows and pulled him out to check his vitals. Princey, whose real name is Zishan Sairoya, was sent home, but 2 days later, investigators found his video on YouTube and arrested him. He's facing charges of making a false report, disorderly conduct, and obstructing government business. A New York City police officer is recovering after being shot in the back. The officer, 31-year-old Danny Vargas, was released from the hospital just 2 days after the shooting. Vargas was working as part of the NYPD's gun violence suppression unit Tuesday night in the Bronx when police say a suspect began running from them.
Everything I am about to say is preliminary at this point, but in the course of seconds, what we know is that our officer, we believe, fired 1 round. We believe the perpetrator fired 4 rounds. And during that exchange of gunfire, our officer was struck what we believe is 1 time in the lower back, below his bulletproof vest.
Police recovered this gun they say belongs to the suspect, later identified as Angenette Jones.
Male, 24 years of age, several arrests in New York City. He has a criminal record in Jersey. When you look at Miles, the breadth of what we sometimes talk about, it's probably on the lower end in terms of criminal record.
Jones was not struck and was arrested by officers on the scene. He's facing charges of attempted murder of a police officer, as well as assault and criminal possession of a weapon.
Our brave officer is 31 years old. He is a 6.5-year veteran with the NYPD. Myself, Chief Monahan, Juanita Holmes, and the mayor visited with him and his family a short time ago. I can tell you that he is in a lot of pain, but thankfully we expect him to make a full recovery.
The officer shook hands with his brothers in blue as he left the hospital in a wheelchair and was assisted into a waiting van. Back for analysis is criminal defense attorney Charlie Rittgers, as well as co-host Terri Austin. Charlie, what was your reaction when you heard this case? And with all that you know, is this the type of case that goes to trial or something that needs to plea out?
Yeah, Brian, it's a horrific case, and this is the type of case that I would immediately attempt to angle to plead out. Now, anytime you have an officer who's injured in the line of duty, you have an uphill battle as a defense attorney, and I hope that this defendant, as most of the nation, is wishing this officer a fast and full recovery, because it's going to be, even if it is a plea, I think it's going to be a pretty steep sentence, and as it should be if you injure an officer with a weapon when he's trying to do his job.
Absolutely. I know that if this is in New York, as I know it is, he's facing at least 20 years to life based on those charges. Terry, you've got to commend the officers, at least to some degree, for the restraint they had here. Witnesses say after the shot, they called out to Jones to put down the gun and then arrested him without anyone dying or there being a serious firefight. What are your thoughts on the arrest?
Well, I'm not so sure I would commend them. They were doing their job. I am very happy that they showed restraint here, because we know that in past history, the outcome has not been exactly the same. The officers really had every single right to use deadly force because they were shot at and, in fact, injured. So they could have responded with deadly force. They did not. I do commend, I guess you could use the word, for using good judgment, but they were technically doing their job.
Yep. Doing their job, but thankfully Jones and this officer get to both go home. Wishing, of course, this officer a speedy recovery, as Charlie had said earlier. Thanks for the commentary, both of you. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, why rapper Tory Lanez is asking a judge to speak publicly. Plus, an NFL player charged with domestic assault issues an apology. Is it genuine or an admission of guilt? Our experts take in just a few. Rapper Tory Lanez is asking a court to allow him to speak publicly about his assault case against another rapper. Tory Lanez, whose real name is Daystar Peterson, is accused of shooting fellow rapper Megan Thee Stallion in the foot last July. A judge issued a protective order against the B.I.D. singer, but his attorneys claim there's, quote, evidence of gunshot residue implicating others, and he's unable to disclose that information. Megan Thee Stallion, who is not subject to the terms of the order, has spoken out publicly about the alleged shooting. Tory Lanez has pled not guilty to felony assault with a firearm. If convicted, he faces up to 22 years in prison. An NFL player is facing felony domestic assault charges for allegedly attacking his girlfriend. Chad Wheeler was released from his position as offensive lineman for the Seattle Seahawks following his arrest. King County prosecutors say Wheeler viciously attacked the victim, choking her until she lost consciousness. The victim reportedly told authorities that when she awoke, Wheeler said, "Wow, you're alive?" The altercation allegedly began after the victim refused to bow to Wheeler. He's out on $400,000 bail and has been ordered not to have any contact with the victim. Wheeler took to Twitter to apologize. Events happened over the weekend that transpired from a manic episode. I am deeply sorry for the pain and suffering that I have caused to Aaliyah and her family. It is time for me to walk away from football and get the help that I need to never again pose a threat to another. Back to break down the former offensive lineman's legal troubles are Charlie Rittgers and Terri Austin. Terry, Wheeler's girlfriend reportedly lost consciousness and spat up blood the very next day. With the difference of size between Wheeler and the victim, many are asking, why isn't attempted murder on the table?
I can't understand why it's not on the table. There's no question in my mind that he attempted to kill her. He choked her twice. She passed out. And reportedly, he said, "I can't believe you're not dead." That shows intent as far as I'm concerned. And there should absolutely be a charge of attempted murder here.
I can see that. All right, Charlie, take this question as my informal audition to be your co-counsel on the next Richardson-like case. But you've got Wheeler reportedly suffering from a bipolar disorder and not medicated at the time. Could this fact maybe play into a lack of intent defense or an insanity defense? What are your thoughts?
I think you're right, Brian. In Ohio, at least, when you have an existing, even if it is not documented, and it sounds like this bipolar disorder was probably documented for Wheeler, he has voluntarily let the public know that this was a manic episode, which relates back to his bipolar disorder. In Ohio, if you have an underlying mental illness, we call it a defect of the brain in Ohio, and that causes you to not understand the wrongfulness of your actions, which is the key, then you can be found not guilty by temporary insanity, not guilty by reason of insanity, even though he's sane 95% of the time. If a lack of medication was the issue and caused him to not understand the wrongfulness of his actions, then he could be acquitted, but still receive significant punishment, which is usually treatment and be in a facility.
All right, we'll keep eyes on that because, of course, there's a lot of moving pieces there. Will they go forward with that? Is he remorseful and he just wants to get that treatment like he said in his tweet? We don't know, but if we get an update, we'll let you all know. Thanks, everyone. When we come back, the emotional victim impact statements from the family of a man killed by a former professional baseball player. We take you inside the courtroom for the sentencing hearing after the break. Prosecutors in the George Floyd case are now asking the Minnesota Court of Appeals to intervene in the case. Derek Chauvin is scheduled to stand trial by himself in March. The other 3 officers are slated to be tried later this summer. A judge has reportedly denied the state's motion both to delay and rejoin the trials, so prosecutors are asking for a chance to argue in front of the state's appellate court. Prosecutors cite COVID-19 concerns. The Minnesota governor is reportedly expected to request $4 million to cover security costs during the trial, including more than 600 state and local enforcement. A former pro baseball player will spend the rest of his life in prison for a triple homicide. Brandon Willie Martin was convicted of slugging to death with a baseball bat his father, his uncle, and a security system installer. Prosecutors say he killed them in a rage after losing his $800,000 contract. But his defense says he has schizophrenia and had a long history of mental illness. So the jury voted to recommend the defendant not be put to death, a sentence members of the victim's families seem to agree with.
Brandon, I'd ask you to turn your head and look at me in the eyes.
Well, sir, we don't want to have any of that. Just go ahead and you need to direct it to me. You're directing it to him through me.
I understand that. This man looked my dad in the eyes before he killed him. And I'm not here to cause a scene other than to speak my heart and my mind and for my father who was murdered by this man. You took something so special from me. You took something so special from this world. You walked into that house not even knowing him, and you took his life when he was trying to save your father and your uncle. You didn't give him a chance. You have no clue the man that you took. If you would have just sat there and maybe talked to him for 5 minutes, he could have been the man that helped change your life, because that's who my dad was for so many. He was a councilman for so many. He was a heart for so many. People came to him with their problems and he'd help them. He walked people off of bridges who were trying to kill themselves. He was the kind of man that saved people, and you just walked in there and took it like it was nothing. If the death penalty had meant a painful death, like you sentenced my father, your own father, and your uncle, I'd probably want that. But how I see it, this man didn't deserve to be put to sleep like an animal that I care about. He deserves everything he has coming to him, and to have plenty of time to think about that as you rot in prison.
All of this could have and should have been prevented. I'm very lucky that my dad was not dead when I got to the house on September 17th. I spent the next 2 days with him in the hospital as he passed away. As he laid there in the hospital bed with his head 3 times the size from the swelling, I was able to hold his hand. Terry and his family deserve the truth. He was hired to protect our family. He died protecting our family. He deserves the truth, not some lies trying to protect some racist mama's boy that murdered him with a baseball bat.
Attorneys Charlie Rittgers and Terri Austin join us one last time to talk Brandon Willie Martin and sentencing. As we heard there, Charlie, it's a tale of 2 stories. It's really one family whose family member killed 2 others, and then you have that installer, the security installer, who was just an innocent bystander, should never have been there, never have died. When you look at the sentence that was handed down, life in prison rather than death, do you see that as a win for the defense here?
I do. You know, being honest, Brian, I have limited knowledge about the facts of the case, but what I've read and what I've seen on the show, a horrific crime, and 3 people's lives were lost. And I'm thankful that this young man is not being put to death, because I think the death penalty is, one, too expensive. It's something that can never, ever be taken away if we later realize that the decision that we've made is wrong. But yeah, I do think that the defense will consider this a win, and I think it's an appropriate outcome in this case.
Now, Terri, how much do you think the family's desires, because it did seem they agreed with this life in prison, their desires may have played into Martin not getting the death penalty in the eyes of the judge?
You know, I think the judge did several things here. I think he listened to the victim's impact statements as far as the defendant's family is concerned. But I think he also considered all of the evidence that went into the case, and that evidence really did show that there was serious mental illness at some point in the defendant's life. And, you know, finally, I do think that he considered the jury's recommendation here, because the jury actually recommended life without parole. They didn't recommend the death sentence here. So I do think that the judge took a good considered look at the case in general and made the right decision at the end of the day, because as Charlie said, you cannot take back the death penalty.
Yeah, and of course, like looking at the case, you look back, he was released too soon from that mental health institution, so of course they might have played an effect. Charlie, Terri, thank you very much, and thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.